it possible to serve our clients' needs on every level. Our customers can reap the benefits from this trust relationship fueled by loyalty. Economies of scale, collective buying power, and effective cost management ensures that our customers gain the maximum benefit to do profitable business. A healthy relationship is based on mutual respect, honesty, and sincerity. We strive to also build such a long-term relationship with you. To reach this goal, we stay in touch with our customers through various communication channels. This ensures that everyone stays informed about new products, developments, and special offers. We are also eager to hear from you and learn about your needs. We welcome suggestions to improve your shopping experience even more. Hinterland is the gathering place for farmers and every city dweller with a home and garden. A one-stop shop for everyone. Our product ranges include a full range of farm supplies, input supplies like seed, fertilizer, and crop protection, fuel, animal health products, and animal feed. We also supply irrigation, outdoor products, DIY supplies, guns and ammunition, as well as garden and hardware products. Hinterland ensures that our customers have full access to these products across the board. Hinterland reaches beyond customer relationships and extends this bond to local communities. At grassroots level, we are involved in various community upliftment projects in local communities. Hinterland is also one of the proud sponsors of the Agricultural Conversation Initiative, Nation in Conversation. This platform for dialogue was created to improve the image of agriculture by having hard-hitting conversation and eventually to reach workable solutions to the various challenges facing agriculture today. You see, through the years, a lot has changed, but still so much stayed the same. At Hinterland, experience meets innovation. Come, rediscover what matters. Onthou jy die vetkoek en muns by die bazaar, die vis en chips in koerantpapier en die naweekbederf saam met oupa by die plaaslike koöperasie? Deur die jare het soveel verander, tog het soveel dieselfde gebly. Hinterland is die bymekaarkom plek vir ons boere. Elke stadsjapie met 'n tuin, 'n huis, 'n eenstop inkopiebestemming. Hier ontmoet ervaring en innovering. Hinterland, herontdek dit wat saak maak.
Goeiedag, baie welkom. Ons is hier by Afkri se standplaas H2 by Nampo. Ons is reg agter die 4x4 baan en ons het 'n uitstekende uitstalling hier met aardappeltoerusting. Die fabrikate wat hier agter my staan is Standen, Imac en dan ook De Wolf. Ons het 'n regstreekse uitsending met Iver Price elke oggend 8:30 en 2 uur. So kom besoek ons vir 'n lekker koppie koffie vir 'n koue wintersoggend hier by Nampo, standplaas H2. En ons het al ons produkte hierso beskikbaar van Unigrow af, Harvest Time, as ook equipment.
I don't do it for the money. I do it for the passion. To inspire others and for others to inspire me. I don't do it for the money. I do it for the promise of a better tomorrow.
In the last few minutes, they crossed it in. It's the crossbar. They're finally.
I don't do it for the money. But I need money to back me.
It's Opry Modiba.
The Nedbank Cup and Giona Team Search. Another way we get money to back you.
15 tot 18 Mei, Nampo, fris, vars, nuwe seisoen, wintertyd, oestyd, maar dan terselfdertyd jagtyd. Ouder gewoonte is Hinterland weer in sy volle glorie in die Hinterlandsaal, waar ons die Hinterland jagwapens aan die kan beskikbaar stel. Ons het enige wapens, of het sy dit 'n jaggeweer is, haalgeweer, semi-outomatiese haalgeweer. Ons het ammunisie, ons het knaldempers, ons het teleskope, ons het flitsse, ons het rugsakke. enige bybehore om jou jagervaring een van die bestes te maak. Kom gerus en besoek ons. Daar's 'n paneel van kundige personeel wat jy met raad en inligting kan bedien. Dan het ons net langs die Hinterlandsaal het ons klereafdeling waar ons ook kwaliteit handelsmerke het. Of dit vir die dame is, of dit vir die man is, of dit vir die kind is, of dit 'n nuwe hoed is, of dit 'n sonbril is, of dit 'n mes is. Ons het braai en ons het kamptoerusting wat verseker aan die vereistes kan voldoen. Kom besoek ons gerus. Laaste maar nie die minste nie, in samewerking met Engine het ons 'n kompetisie waar 2 gelukkige paartjies die geleentheid gaan hê om die F1 Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi by te woon. Geen kostes vir die individue nie. Daarvoor moet jy ongelukkig ons stalletjie gaan besoek. En laastens nooi ek uit om die Nampo ten volle te kom geniet. Gaan groei daaroor, wees veilig. Daan van Hinterland, baie dankie.
Dit is vir ons 'n wonderlike voorreg om weer eens deel te wees van Nampo 2018 en ek wil graag elkeen uitnooi om na Senwes Grinding se stalletjie toe te kom in die Nampo saal en te kom deel in die 3D ervaring van hoe dit in 'n silo lyk en wat gebeur in 'n graansilo en ook met ons graanmakelaars te praat en handelaars en te sien hoe 'n Safex mark werk en hoe dit werk in die graanmarkte. Dis werklik waar opwindend. Ons het 'n opwindende kompetisie ook. Daar's 'n bootreis te wen en ek nooi elkeen uit om die dag hier saam met ons deur te bring.
Van my vroeë oggende by die radio en in die nuuskantoor tot my plaaskuiers dwars deur die land. Dit laat my wonder, waar kom ons kos vandaan? Is dit net die landbouers op die uitgestrekte vlaktes wat daarvoor sorg, maar nog meer as dit? Wie finansier die boere om alles te kry wat hulle nodig het? Wie voorsien hierdie trekkers en implemente? Waar word die kos gestoor en wie bestuur die logistiek agter die skerms? En die groot vraag is, wie ondersteun ons landbouers?
Afgri, jou landbouvernoot vir generasies.
Welcome to Nation in Conversation. I'm Theo Vorster. The discussion today is about the size of a farm, scale, small farmer, big farmer. But before we get to this discussion, I'd like to welcome somebody very specially. Japie Grobler, it is great to see you again here. It's a privilege to have you, and thank you very much for coming today. We really appreciate it. Just a bit of background. In the past, when we had these functions, we had a question time, and then afterwards, we said to the journalists they can stay behind. And all the regular agriculture journalists stayed behind, as well as the representative from the Karoo Kom Daily Dispatch. He was also there asking his questions. Japie, welcome. Thank you very much. I'm going to start with my panel. Next to me is Wandile. Wandile friend. Why is that important?
Yeah, it's important. Wandile friend, Sihlobo means a friend.
Your surname means a friend. Yes. Now, if any of you want to follow agriculture trends, the agriculture industry on social media, he is probably the best person to follow. Not only is he actual, he questions facts and he publishes reports almost on a daily basis. But what's your day job?
No, the day job is not on Twitter. It's on the agriculture economics. I work for the Agriculture Business Chamber. Our focus is more on the policy-related stuff. But obviously, as an agriculture economist, I provide more of the research that underpins what we do.
Wandile, thank you. And then Francois Strydom, who is the head of Senwes. And Francois is the custodian of this Nation in Conversation. It was his idea. He's the figure behind it. And he's the reason why we have packed audiences and we discuss these topics on an annual basis. Francois, thank you very much and thanks for your contribution.
Thank you, Theo. It's a privilege.
Dr. Ferdi Meyer, everybody, when they talk about you, there's an acronym, and then we leave it. What do you do, Ferdi?
Yeah, Theo, thanks. It's BFAP. That stands for the Bureau for Food and Agriculture Policy. I'm also a professor at the University of Pretoria, and BFAP was established 15 years ago, and our business is in outlook work, foresighting, and basically supporting decision-making by policymakers and business in agriculture and agro-processing.
Now that you all know the panel, we're here on Jannie's farm. Jannie, thank you very much. Jannie de Villiers. I think a household name in the agriculture sector. Jannie, again, thank you very much. I think you talked about the numbers yesterday. It is incredible. It's an incredible event. Gets bigger every year. And thank you for hosting us, and thank you for hosting this discussions. Thank you very much, Jannie.
You're most welcome, yeah.
Now, I want to start with you, Wandile. Is there statistics about the size of South African farms available?
Look, there is a bit of statistics, but obviously some of it now is not so updated, and Freddie will agree on that. But if you look at South Africa, we have data from 1900 that is a bit more accurate up until, say, the late 1990s or so. But if you read Fricky's PhD work, it is there up until 2011. But the key message is that the farm sizes in South Africa have changed over time. 1912, as you move in up until, say, 1998, roughly about 60% or so of the farms were at the range of around about 800 hectares so size. But obviously, as we deregulate the markets, we started to see some bit of deviation. But in there also, there's a part that is usually unaccounted, which is the small-scale farming. But on average, yes, there is that sort of information on the trends.
So farms got smaller, and then at some points, larger again.
There are key factors that causes that, because as farms were relatively small in the past, obviously there was a bit of government support that was there through subsidies, the labor market as well. There was a bit of a cheap labor that was supporting those farms. So we go to deregulation where everyone has to be competitive as we go to the world market. Then obviously that consolidation started to happen.
And then farms started to get bigger, but that's not a local trend. I want to get, Jannie, is there any indication of the relative impact of farm size, GDP, and government support?
Yeah, there's good literature about that. You know, when we measure in the world what is the support that farmers are getting from different governments, we call it the PSEs, now the producer support equivalents. And when you plot those,
this is the PSEs is a number that gives you an indication of the percentage support a farm as an entity receives from government?
Correct. Yeah, the professor will be good with the definitions if you like, but so what we do is we've plotted that against, let's say, the farm size, for instance, or against the GDP that comes from that agricultural sector specifically. And what the data is showing is that the smaller the contribution from government to farming, the bigger the farms. You know, if you look at Australia, they got very low PSE, but they've got huge farm sizes. But they've also got very good GDP from that specifically. So if you look at Japan, they've got very small farm sizes, very huge government contribution. I think they had 48% of the farm income comes from government. So it's almost like they don't farm the land, they farm the government there. So
50% of the income is from the government.
Correct.
And that's why their farm sizes are small.
Yeah. So in the South African context, sitting at a very low support from government, the only thing that farmers can do is to scale up to try and be competitive, as Wandiles just said.
I'm going to not come to you now, Ferdi, but I'm going to take that question and turn it on its head and actually do it the other way around. But that's not academically sound. So let me first ask Francois. We all talk about the big farming entities. But if we say that there's in South Africa a major portion of food is produced by smaller farming entities, what is the role of large-scale commercial farmers and where does the smaller farmer fit in?
Yeah, Theo, I think so. You have to look at the whole picture. I think the facts are the following. We have about 1 million farmers. If you talk commercial, subsistence, small, developmental, in total about
roughly 1 million farmers.
Roughly 1 million.
Where does this 35,000 number that's being banded around commercial farmers, where does that fit into that?
That's the bigger commercial farmers, and those are typically the guys that produce a large amount of the total food supply of South Africa, and remember as well of SADC. So it's not only our 57.5 million people, citizens of South Africa, but also the SADC region, and then to a much bigger scale as well, exports to Europe and the rest of the world. So that's the continuum that you see. About 1 million farmers producing to the South African population, SADC and the rest of the world. So I would argue it's not one or the other. Certainly in a commodity business, and a typical commoditized business like maize production, scale is tremendously important. And as Yanni has pointed out, no support, so you have to leverage off size, technology, management systems, the whole continuum of technology that's available to be world competitive. Remember that commodities, as hard commodities and soft commodities, that price discovery mechanism is a worldwide mechanism, which means that a farmer is in day-to-day, second-to-second competition with all farmers across the globe, because the price discovery mechanism is centralized.
That is almost the end price where goods are all derived from. But that's not always the price that the producer gets. If it's a small producer, it's very difficult to get to that market access. But Ferdi, let's just go back to you. In terms of the point that there's a role for both big commercial farms as well as smaller farming entities. Just an initial comment on that.
Yeah, I think, Theo, what's very important in South Africa, we must remember we have different value chains and different markets. And we've been tracking in BFAP for about now 10 years, the commercial farms, and you see where we benchmark them internationally. And you carefully consider what your production costs are per unit. So that's at the end what you guys are referring to is competition on the world market. We need to compete per unit of tons. So in other words, South African farm, at what cost base can you deliver a ton of maize or a kilogram of grapes, table grapes, or a kilogram of chicken meat onto the market and export it? And that's what the real competition is about, and you're correct. So saying the bigger your size gets, the better you have access or have ability to afford your technology and investments.
And that's because of the margin.
Correct. So those margins are tight, but just some very interesting numbers from the research. Let's just take the chicken market, poultry producers. We have smallholder poultry producers selling a live bird at 50 Rand a kilo. Their feed costs, and we've carefully looked at their costing structure, their costing structure is about 40–50% higher, their costs per live bird, but they're getting about 50 Rand for that live bird per kilo. If you go to your highly commercialized change, which most of us are in as consumers, and the highly processed, and you get those contract farmers, big farms, they've got a more efficient cost structure, but they get about 23 Rand per kilo of that bird. So you've got different value chains, but we have to remember one thing: these commercialized value chains are going into the urban markets, and that's where we get a big pull in those urban value chains. So we've got different value chains, different markets, but your big markets and the growing markets are in the commercialized chains, where we are very competitive, and we have to be in this international open market. So some initial comments.
Wandile, is there scale? Some industries, and I think specific maize and corn, is much more determined on size. Is there industries where there is more opportunity to support and assist small scale or traditional farming, and can that happen?
Yeah, I think, I mean, look, the reality of it is the fact that we are living in Africa. South Africa is that. And like it or not, we have a dual economy. You have certain areas that are, in our markets, as developed as they are relative to the world, they're still fragmented. Take, for example, there's someone who produces in the Transkei and Flagstaff, and there are consumers and the producers that are sitting in Free State. So I think considering that we are operating on a scarce resource, which is a limited one on the land. So in that perspective, I think that we can have both systems. Obviously, to feed the nation in a bigger scale as well for export markets and stuff, and to be food secure, you want to make sure that you have the commercial production side. But if you look at the small towns, Mr. Francois can't take Sandvest and go and calibrate it as is in Flagstaff, mainly because maybe economically it might not be viable, and also the way that market is structured. Then for those small markets, you need to have small players that will produce a little bit of something, sell it to a local trader, and then it reaches the consumer. So I think that we might have both of them. And the last point is, Grain SA has done a great job on showing that, because what they've focused on some of their programs on a small 1 hectare, one small farm, they've boosted the yields of those small guys. So now they are able to have a little bit more, sell it to the market, buy a furniture and stuff. So that market needs to be nurtured and supported, while at the same time we focus on making sure that we're growing. But I think we have a room for both of them at this stage in South Africa.
I'm going to come back. Yes.
Yeah, I want to add to that. For me, there was a shift in my mind when we started not talking or debating the scale big versus small, but can we get a commercial yield on every piece of land that we've got in this country? Because of the dual system that we've got, because we haven't got a market functioning in all these old homelands where there's no title deeds and there's no ownership. And under those circumstances, you need to change your, almost say, the hard economic fact thing, and say, let's just start off where we are. Let's get a commercial yield. And some of the people sitting in the audiences are busy doing that every day. They just try to help that farmer use new technology because it's available, even on your scale, and let's just move them from a subsistence farmer to where he can at least sell something and start making a living and growing from there.
Francois, if I take technology, and obviously the bulk of your client base is massive, successful, institutional, or not institutional, corporate farming entities, big guys. Technology for them is very important in terms of the margin. But is it also not true that technology can actually make a massive difference in terms of the effectiveness and the scale of a small farmer?
So it actually is important to you that technology has a much bigger effect on smaller farmers. Look, the bigger commercial operations, they wouldn't have been there if they weren't competitive all the time. So they've sorted out and they kept abreast with all the developments. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been. It's just an international phenomenon. But as Jannie has pointed out, if you come to a small or a medium-sized farmer where per acre, the importance of that is becoming more and more relevant. The big difference that he can make is with technology, with seed, with fertilizer. So it complements that part of the value chain even more.
And there the impact can be double or triple his current yield if done correctly. Ferdi, when Yanni talked about the relationship between small farmers and government assistance, and it seems that the more government assistance, the smaller farm becomes viable, obviously, in terms of the assistance. If you look at the structure, where are those opportunities?
Yeah, Theo, I think we've been privileged to also track some of these for the Jobs Fund, for example, and these type of initiatives. And we can clearly see where there is, it's a combination of your government support programs in terms of finances, but you need your mentorship. You need your mentorship from private sector, public sector to form that partnership to drive these farms forward. And that's the reality that we're sitting with. I think we have a huge opportunity. If we think back at our National Development Plan, 1/3 of our jobs that we identified in that National Development Plan is lying in this sector. Are the small 0 to 0.5 hectare, 1 hectare farms. And we can see that we've looked at some of the statistics over the last 3 years, where Statistics South Africa, if you look at the rural households, their income from agriculture is less than 1% on average. If you look at these farms that we've mapped, we have about 5,000 of those smallholders where we're tracking their performance, and their income, household income, is about 30% of household income suddenly. We're not saying that they can only live off that 1 hectare, and we need to be realistic about that. You will not be able to sustain if your full family on just a 1 hectare farm, but you can supplement your food security status and your income. And that generates about 50% of that surplus production in those areas now suddenly comes into that value chain in that rural area. And suddenly you can get an off-taker. You can market something, you can buy some inputs, and then you get your rural economies going. So I think that's where the opportunity lies. We have that land available, we've got those farmers available. The pity is just that we don't have good statistics on it. So if you look at the formal land census or the agriculture census, and Wandile referred to that as correct, it's 1998. And the problem is that any farm that's not registered for VAT, we don't really have accurate numbers on those. We only know some statistics on farmers who are registered for VAT. Anything below that we're missing in terms of real good numbers.
So we work on a statistical base that we're actually uncertain. For me, if we talk about the production side, that's one element. But the value chain and making sure that the producer gets a market-related price, what can be done in that area?
Yeah, I think that's from the point that I made previously around the fragmentation of those markets. Because if you go, for example, now to the Eastern Cape, to some of the guys that were helped through the Grain SA program, you do find that there are people who are struggling to have those goods reaching the market. If they will be able to do so, by the time they reach there, there's really no value that they can actually get. So part of the government support, I would say, though we argue for it to come in terms of uplifting them on skills basis and stuff, but I think the real one must be on infrastructure. Because those markets are there, Senvest can't participate in there, partially, I'm not speaking on behalf of them, but partially because of the infrastructure basis that won't really allow you and any other agribusinesses to participate there. But if there could be all of that, I think now that pricing mechanism and the consolidation, and if we see a price in the stock exchange, maybe the farmer in Flagstaff in Bizana might receive similar patterns if the infrastructure is fully upgraded.
So Theo, I think we mustn't underestimate the ingenuity of our farmers. I think the first thing is if we grow a population that is government and state dependent, we're on the wrong road. That's the first point I want to make. And if you look across all the different business segments, I think food production is one of the segments of our society that has entrepreneurial skills. They find a way. So when Wandile refers to the Eastern Cape, we've just opened 3 branches in that area. A few interesting things. The first, it's the area of South Africa with the biggest rainfall. There's 1,200 millimeters in that Uge Maclear area, millimeters per year. Second thing, the road infrastructure there is if it's not the best, it's amongst the best in South Africa. If every time I drive down there, they're constantly working on those roads. They're in excellent condition. second thing is there's interesting markets developing there. Of course, you have big aggregation of people in that Eastern Cape, that old Transkei region. And the farmers find ways to develop those markets. For instance, yellow maize production. I met a guy there that delivers in excess of 2,000 tons per month into that area, and it's yellow maize. I was amazed. I would have thought it would be white maize.
But it's yellow maize.
But it's yellow maize. They grind it and form sort of a sludge pop, and it's high sustenance levels through that liquefied product. But for the farmer, what's important, there's not a big differential. So he uses what he sees around him, and those farmers are very, very successful. That's the one thing. The second thing is for the small-scale farmer, the huge issue is market access. So aggregation of his product to reach the market is important. So this guy will consolidate the production of those smaller farmers, and then through aggregation take it into those markets. Another very good example is those small-scale developmental wool farmers in that area.
Brilliant story.
That has now developed into I would say, a market that is world class.
Just on that point, I think it is, what I found interesting was, if you look at, and I see there's quite a bit written on the Muketsi market there near ZZ2 about how do you get small-scale farmers access to the market without losing market price discounts. And Ferdi, let's talk, a term that's used in when you come out of business school is low-hanging fruit. So in terms of the low-hanging fruit to create a flight path to the dripping roast, is there certain farming produce that is more size neutral than others? And I want to steer back to the point that it might not be the whole income of the system, but it might add that 10 or 20 or 50,000 annual income to a system. Is there certain areas that's more conducive to be size neutral, scale neutral?
Absolutely. So I think your capital investment, so we can be very specific about that. The more intensive your capital requirement is, and the longer the time period that you need to get your return on capital, the more difficult it becomes. Then the size becomes a bigger issue. But there are commodities like, especially in your vegetables, your livestock, where you have relatively low levels of capital requirements needed, and you can have a quick turnaround of cash.
And it's not size dependent.
Correct. You can have it, your size, you can always, and that's again where the value chains come in. Which market do you deliver? If you want to deliver into your highly commercialized
retail.
Yeah, your retail chains, then you would put up a big chicken house. If you're going to sell into your local street market fresh chickens, your capital requirements much quicker turnaround. The same for vegetables. So I think that's where the low-hanging fruits are lying, and we can see some of those companies that are putting up these warehouses, as Francois was referring to as the aggregators, who are pulling in this produce now, fresh produce, where you get these quick turnarounds. So those will be the first points of entry, and then Theo, you'll get the evolution coming. If these smallholders, these smaller farmers, are competitive on a small base, then you can see them diversifying, getting into different crops, and you see this natural progression. And by the way, we can just look up north. You can look at Zambia, Ghana. Those markets are shifting, and you can see textbook examples of the evolution, and farms are getting bigger in Africa. There are some statistics that are clearly indicating now that even in those areas where you get an investment of an agribusiness in that area, some aggregator putting the produce together, and you see those farmers gradually getting bigger.
Yanni, from a organized agriculture point of view, if we talk about these things, it seems that grain or let's say the bigger grain market is slightly more focused towards scale. But on your perspective, you are also having success not only in the big mega farms. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think if I just want to add to what Wandile said, for me the infrastructure is still a hampering factor, especially if you go into the deep rural areas. I mean, if we talk Maclear and those areas, there's a huge potential for us to grow on a commercial scale. But when you go a little bit deeper and where Wandile comes from, you know, there the infrastructure is a problem. And the infrastructure is not just getting to the market. The infrastructure problem is getting the inputs to the farmers. So now they don't have access to fertilizer and chemicals and all these other new technology stuff. And this is also a hampering factor. So for me, there is an infrastructure thing. And the other thing is too, when we work with, let's say, a 1 hectare or 2 hectare farmer, you can do it manually. I mean, it's hard labor, but this is what the people are doing. They plant by hand.
It can be done.
And they harvest by hand. But the moment you want to go beyond like 3 hectares to 5 hectares, you need to start with mechanization. And I think this is where our problem is. There's no access to finance, you know, and this is what we need to resolve in terms of the land reform thing. I don't know, we don't want to go there, but this is really the hampering thing. Our bigger black farmers are not entering the commercial level because of the financing constraints, not having access to mechanization. So we need that mechanization. So whilst we are continuing with the urbanization in this country, and if we look at the NDP, it shows us we continue with that. Those people are not going to be able to produce for themselves. Therefore, you need the scale to keep on doing that. But in the meanwhile, we need to help these people, the very small ones, to help themselves in terms of household food security. But there's a huge gap between these commercial farmers and that household food security that is, for the past 20 years, going nowhere. And this is something that we've identified that we need to pay serious attention to.
This gap from household food security, just explain a bit to me, where does that fit in and where is there opportunity in that space?
No, I mean, look, I think the fundamental thing to change again and to transform people is in line with the infrastructure story. Because I would say, while there are small farms that do exist, I mean, we don't have evidence to say everybody wants to remain small, those that are in rural areas as we speak now. But I would say, as you look at South Africa today, we somewhat need a combination of Holland and Brazil. You look at Brazil, they have small farmers, medium scale, commercial that you see in South Africa, then industrial or corporate farms. And in Holland, you find that there are small guys using very high tech, producing more of what Freddie was talking about on a horticulture related stuff. And those guys are getting better yields and all of that stuff. So I would say much of the support that we need to put on is to channel more on increasing productivity of the small farms, more than the land per se. Then once we have achieved the productivity space, we do that in line with making sure that there is infrastructure to deliver that where it's needed. And through that progression, I think that we might make progress, but we can't at a go and say, look, we're taking large farms or small farms. We need both of those working hand in hand at this point.
Yep. I think Brazil is a good example that Wandile is citing. You know, around Sao Paulo is a lot of small-scale farmers, and you have to support them through infrastructure financing, as Yanni said, and aggregation. But in Brazil, there's also a guy that farms 343,000 hectares, and he double crops on that. So from the very small to the huge, and those guys are deep into the Mato Grosso, you know, where they're far from markets. So they obviously scale is very important. It's the only way that you can survive there. That guy has built the whole infrastructure. He's built a town around his farm. It's impressive to see that.
Maybe just to add to that example. So if you look at Brazil, you can draw up an inverse graph, which one says scale, and the other one looks like this, which says value of crop per unit. And that's the inverse relationship that that Brazil is actually a good example of. So the lower the value per unit, like your soybeans and your maize, you need the scale, and the inverse relationship is then obviously your berries or your high value produce that you can reduce the unit size. So there you can have a nice example of it.
With that example, does government realize this?
I think so. I think there's generally an appreciation if one can put the right numbers and on one-on-one discussions. I think there you have appreciation. I think the broader audience is maybe it's not, and maybe here, Wandile, you can also help. How do we bring this out to the broader audience and get an appreciation for those numbers? So if you have these one-on-one discussions and you present these numbers and where we have hard facts and you say this is a story, and you can really see a difference in your socio-economic impacts, your jobs, your rural areas, the economies that we've just been talking about, then there's a good appreciation for it. But to bring this message out, to package it correctly and bring it out to the wider audience, I think that's where we have a challenge. And we don't have the correct numbers to put out around the multipliers. If you would go to Treasury and say, this is what it's going to cost us, I think that's the number that we need to put on the table and say,
this is the cost and this is the output.
Correct. These are the cost benefit, to a cost benefit. If we would really scale this up and say, we understand what we need to do, and this is what's going to cost us, and these are the multipliers to the economy, channel it in this direction. I think that's where we need to sit around a table and put it together.
Francois, Senvest is a commercial entity that needs to do the right thing for shareholders, for the business. When would something like this become attractive for you? Because obviously it is not a traditional market for agriculture companies to get involved. When will it be attractive for you?
So let me just try and start. I think where the right place is for business. It's not with shareholders. You start with a client. If you don't service your client, whether you're a church or a rugby club or a business, if you don't serve your client, there is no reason for your existence. So, and whatever that client wants and where the market is, that is where you should serve it. You know, if we could just steer in another direction. If we pose the question now, is it good or bad that there's low subsidy levels in farming? Now, I would argue the biggest growth of South African farmers were in that period where subsidy were the lowest. That's where you get entrepreneurship. And whether you're big or small, that is true. So I'd rather go that road. I don't think we have to be despondent about that. As I think Yanni referred to, in America, the subsidy levels for a grain farmer is 35 to 40%. And those farmers, they will typically refer to it, they're farming the bill. You know, where our farmers, they don't even talk about it. They work with what they have. They look at production factors, at effectivity, at technology. Those are the right things to concentrate, to sustain your business over the long time. And remember, it's a cyclical business. Two things: it's a fixed cost business, so you have high fixed costs, and it's a commodity. Most of our agricultural products. So there's high cyclicality. You have to live through the bottom of that cycle. Everyone can live through the ups, but you have to survive through the bottom of it. And I think if you build up a resilient economy, which is not dependent on state, that is the best way to go. And surely that is our business model, Senvest, to sustain self-sufficient farmers.
Yanni, we are in South Africa in a position where and it came through all the discussions, poverty, inequality and unemployment is one of our biggest challenges in South Africa. And a note that was made, which for me I wasn't aware of, but that 39% of the unemployed in South Africa actually has never held a permanent position. They never had the luxury or the honor of a job. You talk about scale, and especially in your area, but scale has to do with mechanization, with cutting costs. That is not working towards providing employment. Your comments on that?
Yeah, I'm a believer of the market, so I think the employment will follow, because it is not necessarily primary sector that needs to do all of that. And I mean, BFAP has done a great job to identify to us exactly in which areas do we have growth potential and in which areas we are more labor intensive than not. Because agriculture still got that obligation to absorb a lot of these unemployed and unskilled people coming into agriculture. Because the moment you increase your technology level, I I mean, a tractor driver today must be a computer operator. He can't be, you know, somebody who knows where the flickers are. I mean, he must know how to touch the screen. This is
must also know where the flickers are.
Yeah, well, that's also important. Maybe should stay off the road. Anyway, no, I think, so we are looking at a more advanced, skilled person when it, let's say, come to the increased technology. But for me, and I think Ferry can maybe help us with that, the growth in our labor uptake as agriculture is in the horticulture sector, maybe a lot more than in grains, for instance. But the grains increases will be when we increase our chicken industry, when we go in the downstream industries, and there's a lot of, you know, these guys who have to catch the chickens or something. I mean, they don't need to be highly, you know, educated to do that sort of job. But we need to have the value addition. And we can't just focusing on exporting our maize to China or whoever the case may be. So for me, we must grow the economy first, because before we get concerned about whether mechanization is going to take a few jobs out of if agriculture is not growing, the jobs are not growing. So it doesn't matter whether you're mechanized or not. So we must get the GDP going in agriculture, and that will bring the jobs eventually, and hopefully more in the downstream.
Just on that, I'm going to Francois this to you. I would have interesting discussion at lunch the other day with a farmer, and he said something happened to him that he would never have thought in his life would happen to him. He said, I said, what was it? He said, you know what? I've got technology and I've got some of this big equipment. One of my tractor drivers was headhunted.
Yeah.
And I think that is where you get towards, they get headhunted. But Francois.
So the point that Yanni is making, and the poultry industry is a very important example of that. I think with the balance there is now, of course, the poultry and all the intensive farming units are now, you know, financially at a very good point. But what it leads to, and you could have seen that in the Astral interim results that was announced this week, they're investing over R1 billion in capacity, and that is where the jobs come from. So it's not only maize production, but what happens to the maize through the cycle, and then the concomitant production and job creation and wealth creation that flows from it. So, you know, it's never one of the production factors in isolation. And maybe we should concentrate a bit more on, you know, what the whole system is, because, you know, once you've produced, there is it cuts through the whole economy. Of course, the financiers, the logistical people.
We forget that long chain.
Value chains. Yeah. So
and all participants in that as a whole. Comment from your side?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add on the importance of maize, that we shouldn't underplay that. And I mean, you would have seen in South Africa 2 years back or 3 years back, during that drought period, most of the industries that depend on maize were actually highly exposed in there. Almost everyone that is in the house, the stuff that we use was actually exposed. You would have seen on the prices, on the linkages, on the jobs space. So I think the importance of it, though in the farm level, might be small on a job basis, but when you look through the value chain, like you're saying, it's really key.
Yeah, I think, and going back on that, just to conclude the argument is, it's not only the chickens, it's the crushing plants of soybeans. So let's just do that little chain. It's 2 billion estimated capital investment in soybean crushing plants, creating that pool of local soybean production, investing in productivity at the farm level to get those beans as lowly priced as possible. And now obviously with producers, the higher their yields are, the more competitive they are. We can actually outcompete a Brazilian or an Argentinian landed soybean cake. That's what we're aiming for. So just to come back to the National Development Plan, 1/3 of those jobs are in agro-processing, down the value chain, not at the farm. So really, Theo, on these highly commercial, the maize and the soybean farms, we have to be realistic. They're not going to give us the multipliers, the job multipliers at farm level, at the farm gate. They're going to give us beyond the farm gate. Then we've got the fruit industry, the high-tech, and if we just look back at the last 5-6 years, look at the growth in citrus industry, look at growth in table grapes, we've actually gained market space in the international market. And those are labor-intensive industries. So we are gaining space, market space, creating those jobs. So it's actually working. We just need to keep doing that and doing it better and putting more initiatives behind that. Look at the things that are working.
In that point, that's where there's always, I don't want to open the land space.
We are going to get there. We can't not get there.
No, but the reason...
Yanni also wants to get there.
The reason I'm bringing that on is that if you are looking for jobs and the industries that are growing and there's demand for growth on that, there's demand for those products in the world market and stuff, and they are on the citrus related, and then you say, okay, on small scale farming, let's do the citrus. So can I plant my orange trees now and wait for them for the next couple of years if there's these uncertainty issues that comes about? So which then compels the small scale farmers to do more of the cash crops situation. Agreed. So I think that on hindering growth in that space gets to be an issue.
My take is that, and we've touched on it, in terms of getting access to funding, getting access to logistics, getting access to knowledge, the one element that continuously is circling around is the fact that that small scale farmer doesn't own the property. He has not got access to the formal financial system. He's not got access to the funding system. He can't get input finance. Therefore, on the input side, the system is hesitant to support him. On the other side, because his surety of tenure is not as fixed as it could be, there's elements of infrastructure provisioning. Almost, he or she, and there's a lot of cases it's a she, they almost live as second-class citizens without basic economic rights. To what extent is that a factor when we look at unlocking the potential there? Perhaps.
Yeah, too. I think it's a key factor. So, and that's what I was just referring to now in terms of capital investment.
Those are Yanni.
Yeah, those are the big issues. Is how do you, if you want to invest 500,000 rand a hectare to get that orchard, and it's going to take you 5-6 years to get the returns on that 500,000-600,000 hectares. Whether you're black or white, small or large, it's the same principle. It's capital that goes in where you need returns and you need to service your debt. And the person who's going to borrow you or lend you the money, they want the returns, and there's a risk to it. So, and those are the practicalities that we need to think about if we want to get that growing. So that's a key bottleneck, and then this uncertainty that Wandile is talking about, that already has an impact on the market now that we need to address. Is if capital starts to flow and to being invested, it already has an impact on your productivity and your expansion.
Are you seeing capital change in capital allocation?
So I think, and we can argue about the philosophy of how your economy should be structured. It's a long discussion. I believe in property rights as a basis of that. I believe in not a big support, but ingenuity, because that puts the knife against your throat, and that spurs you. That constant pressure, leverage in your balance sheet. It spurs you to reach that hurdle rate and to perform. And I think those are good things. Interesting what we see in our space, that the small to medium-sized farmer is hesitant.
In terms of developing?
Yep, he listens to the uncertainty, but the bigger transactions, the deal flows are starting to come through there. But that also is a natural phenomenon. And if you speak to the big financial institutions, they will tell you that from sort of mid-January to the end of January, deal flows are starting to come through. And those are the first movers, the guys that sees the world economy slowly turning, the South Africa economy slowly turning. We see the height of the cycle of soft commodity, the aggregation, and where production is starting to normalize and to start pairing with usage. So those guys are first movers, and they're getting into the market.
An interesting point is, just from being involved in nation conversation the last 5-6 years, is the emphasis that a few years ago was purely on scale. And it was almost that scale is the only relevant element, and the rest is somewhere going to completely disappear one day. And it's strange how the logic of the discussion has moved to the importance of a smaller scale farmer coupled with the economy that has got got both big and small.
Yeah, we don't have the luxury in this country to let those tribal lands lie fallow. And we don't have the luxury for them to keep on producing 1 ton per hectare. It can't be that. If we look at the pace at which we're losing land in Mpumalanga because of mining, this country is going to be short of maize in the next 5 years. That means we're going to pay 4,000 and 5,000 rand a ton, where we're paying now 2,000 rand a ton. And I'm talking now to the chickens and the you know, all these downstream dairy and meat products and our own food.
Do you, Francois, have a 5-year maize future I can look at?
I certainly have a view on it, but not a future.
So the thing is, and this is what was encouraging, we haven't debated in the land reform debate. We've never spoke about these tribal lands and the trusts and all these stuff. And all of a sudden, people brought that to the table and acted, you know,
Yeah,
and that's
came
for me
on to this whole
fantastic.
argument.
Fantastic. It is South Africa. We need to talk about it, and we need to get it productive. And if the only way to get it productive is to get title deeds to people so that the market can do its job, then we need to talk about this. Because if we keep on avoiding it, we're going to sit with a crop of 9 million tons and 4,000 rand price, and maybe the farmers will be happy, but I can tell you the consumers won't be happy.
And that's where the big uptake is, what you were noting. The difference can be much bigger on that. I'm going to ask you, each of you, this exact same question. You walk out of here and your cell phone rings. And on the other side is President Ramaphosa. And he says to you, Mr. Nampo de Villiers, you are my new Minister of Agriculture. You will head up a cluster that will involve the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Rural Development, and you, the Minister of Agriculture. Please come back to me with a few basic first move policy instruments or policy decisions. What would you say, what would you prioritize as the first things that will make the biggest impact, Mr. de Villiers?
2 things.
Minister de Villiers.
Waffle. There was like 3 de Villiers ministers already in this country. Now, the first thing is title deeds to the black
Rural
farmers.
area title
deeds. And the second thing is
but
the finance.
That includes urban and
absolutely. Yeah.
Title deeds.
Yeah, give the guy in the township his house, give him the title deed of that so that he can start.
And it's going to cost you nothing, but it's going to transfer a balance sheet item on him.
Same thing applies to the rural areas. And those black farmers that's currently on state-owned land, let them have the title deed. If they don't want to farm, let them sell it so that the market can start working. And we are debating so much about, is it the right beneficiary? Let him sell it off and let's move on with that. So I think that's the first thing, the title deed thing, and then just help so that the finance can flow as quickly as possible, and that will enlarge our production. It will immediately start creating jobs for us.
Minister Meyer, I talked to.
I thought it was my portfolio.
I have a candidate here. I have a candidate here who believes the solution is in that. What would your take be on that? Would you agree with him, and would you take the post?
Yes, Mr. President, I would agree with it, and I would add. Consolidate your Department of Rural Development, Land Reform, and Department of Agriculture. It should be one department.
Why is that?
Because they are working in different spaces currently, and they are not coordinating. There's a producer support. There's a lot of money and disconnect, or a lot of money being wasted, funds being wasted, that are not efficiently and effectively put at the right space, because they're all running different programs. So I would put those 2 departments together, sort out your title deeds, and get those 2 departments together, and then have one structured program with the partnerships in place to drive. So if you have your ownership, your security of tenure sorted out, you've got your departments actually delivering, and with a coordinated program, we put some structure around where those programs are, and you get those partnerships going, build strong partnerships. I would add 2 points to that, saying, to the ownership and title deed story, I would say the departments, that there needs to be effective service delivery, and what the incentives, the policies that are driven to open up our markets and to get the producer support. Because without the producer support, and we need those government programs, together with private sector to support these smallholder farmers to get them into the market. So those would be my two additional points.
I'm just going to follow up something at this point. Is government, and I'm specifically talking about the broader, both departments you talk about, are their decisions based on qualitative research or not?
That's a good question. I would say it's a hit and miss. It's a hit and miss. Some of them are based on good qualitative assessments. Some of them, let's take a land audit. How long have we been asking for a land audit? Or a comprehensive agriculture census, or the flyover data. And that's the point, Theo. So we you know, for the last 10 years, those have been elements on the table saying, let's have a land audit. Let's figure out where these producers are that we need to support. And that's not happening. Where we do have some nice evidence flowing and coming in is, for example, on trade policies, where we've identified certain markets and where there was capacity and in partnership with private sector or the industry, they went into those markets and they opened up the markets and we could export into those markets, which is well done. So there are some of those success cases. But some of the key points, especially around land ownership, around producer support programs, we have not based our policies on sound data and quantitative evidence.
Francois, you get the call, and the president says to you, Mr. Strydom, we have academics and we have agriculture talking to us about this position, but from a business perspective, what will unlock confidence for private-public partnerships to assist me in this process? What do I need to do?
Well, so I think if you look at the balance sheet of South Africa, there's a big unproductive asset lying there. And my first hit would be to award property rights to especially the guys in the urban areas. Because it's dead capital lying there. And if you afford them, and it's a huge number, around cities, around towns, afford property rights to those guys so that they can start accumulating and building wealth. Now it's a dead item on your balance sheet. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think the one thing that will facilitate the economy is if we fix Spoornet. And a shining example is, if you look at our current, at our grain farmers, how many kilograms of grain they produce per millimeter of rain they receive, they are world standard. So at farm level, at farm gate level, they're competitive. When you take that product to FOB, to you know, priced at competitive level in the harbour, they're uncompetitive.
So something gets lost.
It's the logistical chain.
And
so
even more gets lost on the smaller scale guys.
That's even bigger. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, I'll fix Eskom, because that is still a huge production factor. So if you're able to facilitate those three aspects, I think those are the low-hanging fruits. You have to be realistic, what is possible. And I think all of those things are practical and possible in the short term.
Wandile, your call is slightly different because there's a condition on your call. You receive the call and you first have to agree on my condition before I carry on. Will you take over my social media?
Yeah.
Now, if you were to given the opportunity to be Minister of Agriculture with Minister of Rural Development reporting into you, and you've got the ear of DTI.
No, I could employ them as my advisors and take all of what they said.
Yeah.
Our surnames aren't Gupta. So.
Yeah. No, I think the first thing is really on the point that Freddie was making. I would go for that. Merge part of the land reform guys as well as agriculture, because that speaks to the post-transfer support, which we have seen not being effective in a large scale over the past couple of years. Then after doing that, I would get Mr. de Villiers, the potato guys, fruit guys, to provide the training and partner with them, but take some of the capital that I used to use on training and deploy that on improving part of the infrastructure in the rural areas, and the trade guys can also come on that. So I think if you have private sector providing skills and training, you take the post-transfer support to be aligned with what the agriculture is doing and improve infrastructure, which speaks to what Francois was saying, that we could see progress.
Your view on title deeds?
On title deeds, oh, I forgot that. That's key. Yeah. Look, title deeds is key to prosperity. So.
But are we allowed to ask you, if you, the Minister of Agriculture, you've looked at us from the outside, you started here at Nampo quite a few years ago, and I mean, you were, I know what you said in those days, so what is your take on this?
Look, I'll give you my experience from viewing the discussions now and looking back at the past. The political discussion is still around. And I've got the feeling that we're moving closer to a solution. And why that's based on it is that if I interact with you guys and have the discussions that we had, it's almost like the fringes are falling off.
Yep.
It's almost like they're being left behind by this train. And it's almost coming back to the point that the discussions are rational, they're orderly, and they have in mind food security, giving more people access to the economy, and increasing the investment in the agriculture sector. That's the first thing. The debate has centralized. That's number one. Number two, the questions being asked where there's criticism. They don't criticize the commercial farmer. They don't criticize the agriculture companies. The criticism is against a non-delivery by government. That is also changed. The criticism is non-delivery by government. And it's almost like, how can everybody assist us for government to fulfill their mandate? That's the second point. The third point, I think, was noted that the segment of smaller traditional farmers has become a priority to solve. So that's just from that perspective. Having the discussion where it is now, I think there's underlying almost that dead end is out of it. It's not there was a time when it was not a crossroads, a T-junction. That's gone. We've taken the right turn at the T-junction, or left, whatever you are. We turned in the direction that we required to turn. The question now is, how do we take it from there? If I were to ask you, Francois, from a farming perspective, are we in a better place now than we were 5 years ago?
So I mean, that has a lot to do with the pricing structure at that point. So holistically, I would say yes, we are at a better place. Look, some of our commodities are at that bottoming out. So I can see our balance sheets moving sideways and further consolidation taking place. So, but that's a snapshot. We know that we're in a cyclical. Is the guys better equipped to compete? Yes, definitely. We need to fix the infrastructure in the country. That is a huge, huge issue. And we have to focus on that. And you can see Praveen Gordhan has cleaned out the land bank. Sorry.
Hopefully not. That was done 8 years ago.
He's cleaned out the ESCOM, he's cleaned out Spoornet.
The land bank is probably one of the only SOEs in South Africa that's actually performing according to mandate and is a national asset, my view.
Yeah. So he's busy cleaning out those SOEs both on board level and at managerial level. So you can see where the focus is. You referred to Minister Nene, whose key focus is to create stability and surety. He wants the policy matters to be cleared out. They understand the economy, and that's why they're working it. And you have a very sane and rational president who is patient, who's not pushing issues which he shouldn't push. So we're at a very good space, and that bodes well for all sectors of the economy.
I'm going to take that as your final comments. Are you comfortable with that? Just on that, you talked Nene being rational. If you really want to have a great idea of the thought process, Minister Nene visited the foreign investors in South Africa between the 12th and the 16th of March this year. He presented London, New York, Boston. There's a document on Treasury that he presented on the Treasury's website. If you're not sure about the quality of logic, go and read that presentation. It's it's a proper presentation. That presentation says that if we get policy certainty, we can add permanent 0.4% to our GDP growth. And if you add a bit more certainty in specifically agriculture and tourism, you can add an additional 0.2. Yanni, a final comment.
I think for me, Theo, just coming back to our title, the debate is not for me about big and small
it's
at the
moment. It's
moment.
not versus anymore.
It's not versus. I would just say get the small on a commercial basis, whether it's 1 hectare or 10 hectares or whatever the case may be.
That means on a yield, financially viable yield that makes, even if it's a small contribution.
Yes, Theo, I want to add to that, saying I think we're in a better space than 5 years ago. If we look at the success that we've had with these programs, we now know that it can work. These PPPs can work. We've got examples. We can put them on the table, say, this is what works. Look at these examples. Look at these economies growing. Look what happens to an industry where there's capital investment due to policy certainty. And it can grow. We can actually displace other players in the international market. We can displace imports. We have invested in agro-processing. All these things are happening, but we need to continue with those, and we can only continue with those if we have policy certainty remaining with a clear plan. So I would say we're in a better space. Policy uncertainty-wise, that's where we need to play it now very careful and be very secure in terms of the message that we send out, saying, guys, don't stop investing. Just make this go stronger, and this is the way that we're going to take it forward.
What are you going to tweet right after this?
Look, I think we are in a better place now, and even some of the policy discussions that are providing causing uncertainty. But I think that the other way of looking at it is that now this is an opportunity, or this is room for us to have a conversation as a country, and only if policymakers could be more willing to listen and the private sector be more bring forward some of the plans that they're having and make sure that we reflect on those plans. Either you are looking at land, but be more willing to take the outside input so that we may find a workable solution. But central to that is, again, the issue of title deeds across, so that we have that investments. Farm sizes, I think we can live with all of those sizes like we listed, but we are in a better place.
Thank you very much. I wonder how you can fit that into 144 characters, but
around it.
I want to thank my panel. Guys, thank you very much. I think this was a brilliant discussion. I think it again shows the fact that if we talk about the issues, there is issues that can be addressed. And thank you very much for your participation. Can we give them our hand? Thank you very much for joining us in this Nation in Conversation debate. I think it was interesting, it was enlightening, and I agree, there is light at the end of this tunnel. We have progressed, and we've realized that there is not a simple solution. We will have a few solutions, but we are getting there. From me, Theo Vorster, good day. We're going to just give it any questions, please put up your hand and state who you're from. There's a question there.
Hi, Sabrina Dean, Farmers Weekly. Coming back to economy of scale, you did touch on it during the debate as well, but if we have to look at, the whole concept of your smallholder farmer farming on smaller parcels of land, we've heard that can supplement household security. But if we were to go into a model of saying, let's do away with commercial farmers in a country like South Africa, let's just have everybody producing on smallholder farms. I know that that model does work in a lot of other or is employed in a lot of other African countries. Is it viable for national food security? Not for household food security, but for national food security. for everybody to be producing at a small scale like that.
Who would you like to answer that question? Because they're going to get quoted in the media as we carry on.
Any one of our experts, actually, possibly anybody, any one of them would be able to give insight.
All right.
So, first one.
Okay. Minister Meyer.
The answer is no. We can't shift to a smallholder farmer base, and we need to look at these cases very carefully. So we'll go and recalculate those. We did a bit of an analysis about 2-3 years ago, where we looked at how much maize do you need to get the equivalent income of a minimum wage of a farm worker. It was around about 12 to 13 hectares. We can redo that. A mining worker was about 30 hectares. A taxi driver, average income was about 50 to 60 hectares, if I remember correctly. And a middle salary level in the Department of Agriculture was about 700 to 800 hectares of maize. So those are just kind of, we'll redo those numbers and just make sure that they are correct. But just gives you a context of, that's the first point. Second point is, carefully look at what's happening in Africa. It's going the other way, the other direction now. So you see in Zambia, we are having a transition from smallholder into medium scale. So the majority, where 10 years ago, in Zambia, you had about 70 to 80% of food production coming from smallholders. It's now the medium scale. So medium scale is about 20 to 100. Those are the guys. And it's moving in that direction. Ghana the same, Uganda the same, Tanzania starting with a trend. Kenya still small, so you're correct. So there are different case studies. It depends on your market. The reality, however, is that our value chains and our urbanization and the way that the evolution has worked determines or basically dictates that we need the commercial farmers to supply into those value chains.
Perhaps part of that answer is then that if we have a urbanized, well-established value chain, like you walking into Woolies, there's a different supplier required for that value chain. And I think that's also part of the but anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah. Just a quick on the statistics, and in Wandile, maybe you again looked at those numbers. The size of the Eastern France, where you guys are now in that market, is about a 300,000 ton market of maize meal, or maize, and then maize meal equivalent in the Eastern Cape. That market, initially, you can have those smallholder farmers delivering first into the smaller units. Eventually, and they are probably better suited initially, and then you get your investment from agro-processing companies on your infrastructure, and then the evolution starts.
Yeah, so it might be different for another product, but if we want to talk food security of the basic commodities like grains, I mean, South Africa and I think Botswana is the only sub-Sahara countries that's food secure at the moment. So it doesn't seem like, if you divide your country in just small pieces of land, that you will be able to be food secure. And the higher you go with the urbanization, the more,
Yeah. All right. Further questions? Yes, there's a question there and then at the back. John. I'll take the first one. John from Nedbank.
Hi, it's John Hudson from Nedbank. It's probably not really a question, but a comment, and I think it fits in well with that market access or development of the market. And I agree with the infrastructure challenges and all of that. But in some early work being done by the WWF, for example, in some of the livestock areas, again in the Eastern Cape, we're talking Matatiel, etc., where they've created a market, or they've got mobile auction sites, which now then there's now a platform for that livestock in that area. What we've noticed is that because that market is there, the farmers start to really understand the value of their product better. Because previously they didn't know what the value was. There was no price mechanism to really guide them on that. And in a very short space of time, that has led to the improvement and the efficiency and the productivity and the quality of that livestock coming through. And I suppose that the challenge for us is how we then link that to the rest of the value chain. And if you can have that mobile auction sites in the Eastern Cape, for example, and it does attract your buyers or your bigger feedlotters into that, that seems to be a natural pull, and people then react to that. And I think Francois mentioned it. Farmers are really good. If there's the incentive there, that they will react in that positive way. So maybe just a comment.
Thank you for the comment. Value, anybody want to add anything to it? I think, thanks, great comment. Thank you very much. At the back.
Theo Dani Minnar, Boer Kroonstad. Ek wil dalk 'n paar opmerkings maak as raadgewer van die minister van Landbou. En ek stem heeltemal saam met die beginsels wat hulle uitgewys het en die goed wat ons moet doen. En ons moet so min as moontlik in hierdie mark inmeng. Maar ek dink wat 'n minister van Landbou in hierdie land verseker moet doen, is om na 'n droogte subsidie versekeringsskema te kyk. Die oomblik as ons dit daar stel, dan stel ons al die boere, groot, klein, medium, in staat om te kan produseer. Jy skep voedselsekuriteit, jy skep vir die industrie sekerheid in terme van produksie en pryse, hy kan meer nywerhede daar stel, en ons is in die langtermyn ketting, al die werk wat ons moet genereer, gaan ons dan deur daai ketting genereer. Die tweede een wat ek sal doen, ek sal aggressief tariewe meer gebruik. Die koringindustrie in Suid-Afrika het platgeval as gevolg van subsidies wat ander lande hulle boere gee. En deur tariewe daar te stel, gaan jy die mark daar stel dat ons 100% self-sufficient in kos gaan raak. Huidiglik het ons sekere goed wat ons uitvoer in Suid-Afrika en ons goed wat ons invoer. Maar as ons tariewe daar regstel, dan kan Suid-Afrika 100% selfvoorsienend in alle kos wees en dit skep sekerheid en dit skep werk.
Thank you. The point that I think is almost all countries that are regarded as absolutely free market countries, US, India, most of the South American countries, have an underlying protection credit system of sorts. And I think that is something that we need, that risk mitigation. I mean, there's even, if you just purely look at the makeup of South Africa, there's certain areas where the normal commercial insurers are not even, don't want to go. So there needs to be assistance there. Comment?
Yeah, I think our regulated system was almost like an insurance. When the minister made the prices and the maize board was in place and all of that, so you need, that wasn't needed to have, like, let's say, necessarily a crop insurance system from government, because that was our crop insurance system. But since the deregulation, there was just nothing. So the market moved on, but what the market was telling us, that climate change is getting, a bigger issue. The insurance doesn't want to necessarily go into the northwest province because of the higher risk, and for every hectare they do this side, they need to do like, 50,000 on that side just to make their books balance. So what we are currently talking as an industry jointly is to bring a proposal to government and to the minister and say, listen, we need a crop insurance system, because it is not just to mitigate climate change stuff, it can also help a new farmer who has for the first time put everything in the soil, and then when there's a drought, he's gone forever. So you need to have something to just give the guy a next chance, and we have been, there's some positive noises coming from our Minister of Finance about the possibility of something like this. And we need it. If we think about the farmers that we visited in the US the other day, that guy said, we said, well, the prices are low, you're going to plant less this year. I said, no, same thing, because he's got 85% of the country is crop insurance, and the government's paying half of the premiums. I also would like to farm that way. It's you buy a baler to bail money. You don't bail the cotton and all of those stuff.
Any comment on the food security second point?
So I think the crop insurance suggestion that Donald leaves is it's something that we are.
You listen to your advisor.
It's disaster management, and I think that's one of our. Remember, we had in government a disaster management team.
Yeah.
That's been lacking for the last 20 years, and private sector has really taken up that position. Commodity organizations. Companies like ourselves and many others have taken up that space, and farmers help each other. You've seen that in the last 4 or 5 years. If it weren't for farmers in certain areas, others wouldn't have survived. So if you can relieve that through, and that's really an income hedge that you have, more than a current crop insurance product, I think is outlived. It's old. It should dynamically and I know that there's movement in that, where they would rather hedge income for that disaster. But a state subsidized system for that, I think, is a sane product.
Maybe just to add 2 points on this is, I don't know whether you know, Bandile, you might know this, that the lowest maize price in the world, do you know where that is? It's Malawi currently. About $100 a ton. That's what maize is trading at in Malawi. Why? That's about 30% below world prices, lower than ours also. Why? Because there's a surplus production, there's no market, and they are basically landlocked. Where does this maize go? And that volatility last year, and then the year before that, the price was over $350 a ton. So you get these huge cycles. So it does knock out, if you don't have those insurance programs, your smallholders are the first ones that are knocked out completely. You just can't handle it. First point. And then the second point, so that's around the crop insurance program. And if we can roll those programs out to the smallholders as well, and then that's where these insurance companies, private sector, they've got certain norms from the back insurance, and that's again where we'll have to have a look. How can we mitigate some of those elements? Because if you're in the private sector business of an insurance company, you're not going to put out that risk. It's just too high, and you've got your certain norms. So we can't expect it. It's a reality that we're facing in this country. And it's a very good point. I agree.
Koringtarief.
Wil jy koringtarief praat?
He asked something about the
wheat mechanism. Mechanism of the wheat tariff is probably the biggest issue now also. And it comes back to delivery and efficiency of departments. When is it announced? And if we carefully look at the imports, how they've been held back, and suddenly depends on whether you import the boat or do your booking of imports today or tomorrow, because there's a big uncertainty on when this tariff will be announced. So yes, there's an issue around the tariff, how big the subsidy needs to be in terms of our tariff, our protection needs to be of the industry. First point, but second point is the mechanism, and the trigger mechanism currently is probably creating the biggest uncertainty in the market, because if you are a miller, if you're importing today, tomorrow you might be 1,000 Rand a ton, well, not that extreme now, but about 300, 400 Rand a ton out compared to your competitor. So there were companies last year that made a huge loss just because they timed the imports at the wrong time, and the tariff was not announced at the right time. So in other words, there's a problem with the mechanism of these announcements, which causes another bottleneck in the system.
I think on a tariff one, we need to maybe have some sort of timing to say, if a tariff triggers on Friday, 5 days after that, it should actually be set in. If you sit with today, for example, as I'm speaking to you, there's 2 that have actually been triggered, but there's nothing that has actually been published on Government Gazette and then continued. What that does, it dries up the market. You had a period of about 7 weeks or so without anything coming on in a country. Not to say that I'm encouraging imports, but they were needed at this point. And I mean, you're expecting to import close to 2 million tons. Right now, you're still around about 60% of that. And all of this creates uncertainty. It affects the profitability, like Freddie said. I think we have to have a time frame that when policy changes, steps should be followed.
On the tariff thing, I want to release an elephant in agriculture that very few people actually know about. When we impose an import duty on all products in South Africa, that money goes into a pool, and that pool of money, 90% of that income goes to the BLNS countries, Botswana, Namibia, Swaziland, and Lesotho. It doesn't come to South Africa. So we are paying that import duty as consumers. The money goes into a pool and it goes to our neighboring countries. I was just thinking, if we can take, let's say, the wheat tariff, and we can take that 2 billion Rand a year that we paid for, and put that into research, and get drought-tolerant varieties and higher-yielding varieties in place so that we can be less dependent on the world for imports. What a big difference would that make? And I'm not saying, you know, the king of Swaziland doesn't need another name and another wife and another car, but somehow South Africa need to manage that differently. I think we want to help our neighbors, but the way in which it is run at the moment, it's unfair, and that needs a big revision.
I think it's not only
just the Minister of Finance of Namibia will not like his counterpart in South Africa. Almost 30% of their income comes from the split. But yeah.
I think it's not only just unfair, but I think it's not productive for us to have a tariff whereby we are protecting an industry, but we are not doing anything to really uplift and deal with the ills that are in between. So regardless of how the revenue sharing will be, but I think there should be a pool for research that should be notable.
Yeah, I'm going to allow one more question. Yes.
Thanks. I'm Danine Erasmus from Farmers Weekly. And I really just want to speak or ask about creating a conducive environment for entrepreneurship in which small-scale farmers will be encouraged to scale up either in size or in productivity. And I'm thinking about a comment that was made by one of the panel members, I can't remember who, that when commercial farmers in South Africa really grew and increased their size and productivity was when there was suddenly this vacuum of subsidies. So my question is about, in what way does social grants replace a subsidy for small-scale farmers? Because I remember looking at research a month or two ago that in a certain area, small-scale farmers were deriving about 90% of their income from social grants. So is there a better way to administer social grants so that it acts as an inspiration for entrepreneurship rather than breeding greater dependence? And is this maybe a reason why small-scale farmers in certain areas aren't acting as entrepreneurs because they know that they can rely on these social grants?
Thank you very much. It's a difficult question, so perhaps do you have anything on that?
So Denis, I think we'll share with you the data that we have available. So we're trying. I think that's a very relevant question. So first of all, the day when those social grants are handed out in those rural areas, that's when the market flows. So you cannot underestimate the market power that it creates, the buying power. Those social grants in those markets, just to say, okay, so and basically the majority. We'll just carefully have to have a look at the stats, but it's around about 50% of the surplus that's produced by these rural farmers that we've just talked about now goes into those markets. That's where they're selling. So those social grants are creating a huge buying power in these rural areas. But I think you've made a very valid point. I think something to really go and have a look at to say, can you apply these social grants more effectively and say, so can you channel it in such a way? But currently it's definitely giving this safety net. We just talked about insurance safety net. It's just definitely giving a market buying power safety net for a lot of those rural economies. Just money being pumped in and people actually going to buy food or some trade taking place. But it's a good question and we definitely need to look at it.
So am I getting you right? The 50% that's not going into the Steinhoff companies is going into the... no, it's all of them there in a row. the PEP stores, and you count them, they're all there. Yeah. The other 50% actually goes into the rural agriculture sector. Is that?
It's the grain, Theo. So in other words, the surplus grain. Right. Sorry, not their revenue. Yeah. So it's whatever's being sold into those. And we've got nice statistics on exactly this household. What does this household look like in terms of income? And we can compare that to income of a household that has no agriculture activity or very little. And then we can compare that. So I think it's definitely worthwhile, that exercise, to understand those multipliers.
So the data,
thank you very much.
Yeah, the data that we've given to FADI was, the Treasury is interested. They're giving us a rand for rand on the job fund to this 1 hectare farmer. So they are looking at, will this 4,500 rand not generate more income to this guy than giving him a grant every year? Or maybe they can reduce the grant, and try and generate economic activity that generates more money than just grants.
Last point from your side.
Yeah, I think, I think the grants will help more on the demand pool, like you were saying. But the one thing that I want to highlight is that we cannot take the grants as somewhat maybe replacing a sort of a subsidy. Because if you look at the age level of the people that are receiving grants, those are people that cannot farm. It's kids and the senior people. So those people are the ones that help on a consumption side, creating a market for those small-scale farmers.
Thank you. Brilliant question. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks for attending. I think it is a brilliant panel. Let's give him another hand. And thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
It is ordinary people that inspire us and give us hope. And here at Sinvis, caring for one another goes without saying. Our strength lies in our people and in you, and relationships that are built and fostered over decades. Sinvis, together we break new ground.